Janice.
I'll call this meeting to order. This is the Salina Fieldhouse Qualified Active Low-Income Community Business, Inc., otherwise known as the Qalic-B, for June 10th, 2019. I'll call the meeting to order. First item of business is approval of the minutes of December 17th, 2018.
I move the minutes of December 17, 2018 be approved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item will pass 5-0. Item number 3 is new business, 3.1. Would the clerk like to read that for us?
Item 3.1, a resolution approving an addendum to a construction contract with Crossland Construction Company Incorporated relating to the Salina Fieldhouse construction project.
Staff like to give us a report?
Sure. I feel for the listeners at home and others, it might be good to explain. You mentioned the fact that you're sitting as the qualified active low-income community business, and we have Mr. Ryan chairing this meeting, and I'll provide a little bit of an explanation. As I'm sure you recall, New Markets Tax Credit financing was an integral part of financing the Fieldhouse project, and with that came the most strings I've ever seen attached to funding that I've been involved with in my career. But trying to simplify that as much as I can, it was necessary to form two entities, a leveraged lender that was the one that kind of processed the city's funds and the community funds that were donated, as well as the tax credit funds, and then the Qalic-B. The Qalic-B, for a 7-year period, is the owner of the Fieldhouse. And so one of those two bodies could be the city commission in its entirety, but not both. So we made the strategic decision that the Qalic-B, being the owner of the Fieldhouse and the one that would make some crucial decisions at the end of that 7-year process, was the one that should be reflective of the city commission. So you're sitting, the makeup is identical. You're currently sitting as the Qalic-B and the owner of the Fieldhouse to process this item. So as a result, we also have a board of directors of the Qalic-B, and Commissioner Ryan is the chairman of that board, and that's why he is chairing rather than the mayor at the moment. So having said all that, the item that's here before you today is in response to the concrete cracking issue that surfaced shortly after the Fieldhouse opened, if not as the Fieldhouse was opening. As a little bit of background, we went into that whole project design and process concerned that we were over budget, so we did what we euphemistically, I shouldn't say euphemistically, what we commonly refer to as value engineering. That was kind of a new term, but we threw it out quite a bit as part of that process. So staff, along with the owner's representative, along with the designers and the contractor, tried to identify areas for cost savings, and the floor finish was one of them. So we were the original plan was something other than exposed stained concrete as the floor finish in the lobby. We dialed that back. There is some carpet that's green and kind of looks like AstroTurf in part of the lobby, but there's quite a bit of exposed concrete in the lobby, the offices, the storage room, the walkway for the north basketball courts, or the north courts. That started to crack and cause concern. We started tracking down what the cause of that was. And if you're familiar with the area, there's quite a bit of cracking in front of the water fountain, in front of Travis Shealy's, the director's office. So we did some course. We worked with our owner's representative. We worked with the designers, and we also brought in outside third-party objective engineering counsel in the form of Jim Manley, a local structural engineer here in town. Did some core testing and did some other examination. I also involved Walter P. Moore, who was the designer on the project, and you may recall there was concern about the correct way to contract with them to maintain their objectivity, but Walter P. Moore did an extensive investigation in response to the ongoing conversations we were having, and that report is attached to the documents that you have here. So their initial identified issues and I guess you could say conclusions were there's the possibility of the presence of unsuitable fill within the subgrade below the concrete floor that could either be contracting or expanding and contributing to cracking. There was lack of properly constructed control joints. There were some structural aspects and equipment aspects to those joints. Improper placement of reinforcement wire mesh. It was found, as part of the core sampling, was found to be low in the concrete rather than in the middle or where it was supposed to be in the concrete. There were instances of adding water to the concrete, which is a typical practice to keep the slump or the viscosity up, but you can add too much, and there was concern about that. And then there was a recognition that the control joints weren't cut in the concrete in the timeframes that the contract called for, which are kind of industry standards to have that be a properly functioning expansion joint. So, I've had it described to me that concrete's going to crack. The control joints are just a way to try to control where it cracks. Well, the timing of that becomes important in terms of, number one, getting the control joint in, but then secondly, allowing the concrete some opportunity to move. And if the reinforcing mesh is not in the proper location, it kind of defeats the purpose of that saw cut control joint in the first place. So we had a combination of factors that we felt like contributed to the cracking that we're seeing. Spent a lot of time and consulted with the experts on it in terms of what does that mean going forward. We know we have cracking, but structurally, what does that mean, and what can we expect in the future? What solutions might be an option? So you may recall we had previously had conversations about, is this cracking horizontal or could it go vertical? And personally administering the project, my concern all along was the possibility of vertical separation. At that point, it's no longer just an aesthetic issue, it becomes a structural issue, and the solution gets much harder. So there's been quite a bit of time that's elapsed from that core testing, from the Walter P. Moore initial report, and ongoing conversations as well as negotiations with Crossland, the contractor. And I assured you quite some time ago that Crossland has been responsive, and I would tell you that they still have been. There's been quite a bit of hurry up and wait on both our parts as we try to process this information. But they remain committed to acknowledging, they acknowledged at the outset that it was an issue. We noticed them up within the required time frame within the contract to keep our rights intact in terms of being able to pursue a remedy. They haven't fought that, and then they've negotiated with us to get to the addendum that we have before you this evening. I'd be happy to go into the addendum in whatever level of detail that you might like. In my report, the agreement itself is very well written by Aaron Martin with Clark, Mize, and Linville in terms of the recitals, kind of giving you the history leading up to it and the thought process. But what I would tell you is there's really kind of three aspects here. One is an agreed upon testing plan and core sampling. And we tried to identify, we went back and looked at the inspection reports and the soil reports and tried to synchronize the core sampling locations with the identified areas where soil stability and the need for removing and replacing soil was identified as part of the initial construction process. So we're trying to get core samples pulled in locations that have the highest likelihood of being a problem to see whether we have structural soil problems or whether it's more just the joints and the mesh and some of the things identified by the Walter P. Moore report. Having said that, we tried to isolate that to the areas of exposed concrete. We considered the hardwood basketball courts, and the way they're installed, just didn't see a very practical way to core through them or take up a section of them. We also looked at the synthetic courts and initially talked about going through where the volleyball standards go into the court. There's an entire sleeve system there. It's an opening in the floor, but there's concern about if we core that, our ability to get it all put back together and have it function correctly. So this approach is 7 additional coring locations in the areas that we have previously identified as soil that was to be replaced. It reserves the right that we as the city could choose to conduct additional core sampling simultaneously with the ones called for in this agreement at our expense, and they're about $750 a location. So if we have some concern about other locations, we can take those on. It also reserves the right to require additional testing, and not just core sampling, but additional testing in the event that these initial core samples create a reason for concern. So this really, step one is strategically located core samples to try to better ascertain whether we have a broader problem. I should back up. The water fountain, one of the concerns is that lines up with a water line run, and so it may not be an extensive soil problem as much as a trench backfill problem. But admittedly, there are other locations of concrete cracking other than just that location. So we get through the core sampling and we start to reach a conclusion. Then, at our reasonable discretion, without the intervention of the contractor, we then have pre-agreed to 2 courses of action. One, which we are referring to as option 1, and that's if we get comfortable based on the test results that we don't have vertical cracking concerns. It's more related to the mesh and the control joints and the lack of hardware. Then we could talk about a membrane system and a flooring system to essentially replace the exposed concrete flooring with tile or something that's aesthetic that won't reflect those cracks from the concrete through the flooring system. Crossland is prepared to do that at their expense. We'd have to come to agreement on exactly what flooring is selected, but we've already called out that taking up the carpet in addition to the exposed concrete, trying to come up with a solution that will get us aesthetically where we wanted to be in the first place. If the core sampling doesn't turn out favorably, they've acknowledged that means removing the concrete and reinstalling it as it was originally designed. We didn't go there as step number 1 just because of how invasive it is, and in talking with the contractors and the owner's representative, you can get pretty close to the walls, but to truly get those slabs removed and replaced, it gets to be problematic in terms of disruption of the walls and some of the, not necessarily structural aspects, but it's not just taking the concrete out at that point. It definitely is invasive in terms of scheduling and our ability to use the facility. So I may be oversimplifying it a little bit, but essentially if we can get ourselves comfortable with the help of our subject matter experts that we don't have a vertical separation risk, then it's more of an aesthetic improvement in terms of stepping up the materials and the aesthetics. The other thing I would tell you is in that scenario, the Crossland extends the warranty for an additional 5 years because we're having to speculate a little bit and accept work that wasn't according to the original plans. If that's not the conclusion of the core testing and it becomes necessary to take the concrete out in its entirety or in large slabs, that Crossland's also agreeing to do that at our direction at their expense. But that ultimately is essentially installing it per the plans and would carry with it an additional 1-year warranty. So that's really kind of it in a nutshell. It's unfortunate that we find ourselves here. We did not want to jump to any conclusions in terms of just kind of dismissing the problem. It's taken a long time, but I think you'll find the Walter P. Moore report, the investigations, and what we found, while it's not ideal by any means, there's multiple issues that they identified. There's a lot of consideration given to how those interrelate with each other, the lack of the control joints being cut, the mesh being low rather than being cut through, kind of contributes to maintaining it and not having a vertical separation problem. But in the end, we're all kind of optimistic that if the core samples come out right, we might be able to get comfortable with option 1. Crossland's, by way of this agreement, acknowledging the testing plan and option 1 and option 2, depending on the results of the testing plan. So I hope I haven't glossed over anything, but I think that's it in a nutshell.
I think that's a good summary. Other questions for staff?
I have several, one of which I did communicate with you earlier today. And just for the benefit of people who are watching, city staff were not the oversight personnel for this project in terms of the construction project, correct?
Correct.
We hired a consultant called Frew Development Group, and Frew Development Group was contracted with to serve as our representative to oversee the construction process. And my first question that I reached out to Mr. Scragg about is, how much have we paid in total, both for the initial contract and then for subsequent monitoring and advice during
Right.
testing, have we paid to FRU?
Yeah, and if I could get, you're right, if I could clarify a couple things. In a typical project, the inspection that takes place is just city inspections for permit purposes, whether it's our project or anything else. The role that FRU served in is called the owner's representative, and the intention is that they're there, they're our eyes and ears day in and day out, rather than just kind of random inspection testing. The contract we had with them was not only for the inspection services, but they actually serve, if you recall, we started out as a construction manager at risk purchase process or selection process. So we contracted through to serve as our representatives prior to construction to help us with
Right.
design and budget and those type of things. So from the very get-go of that all the way through inspection, the number that we reported to the new market tax credit lenders end of December of 2018 was right at $500,000.
And does that include, I know that we had several months of ongoing $8,000?
Yes.
A month.
That covers that time frame, and they have been providing some services. Most recently, they haven't been charging us for the services to assist us. I understand, but, so yes, there was, to complicate it further, they were our owner's representative on multiple projects. So the 8,000 that you're referring to was at the point that they were only involved with the field house project, but this number should include that cost as well.
Right, because first of all, I went back to make sure that I understood what their responsibility, FRU Development Group's responsibility was to us. And, I mean, the first sentence sets out, or the first paragraph, the purpose of providing construction oversight and inspection services in connection with the field house. And it goes on to list progress reports, adequacy of contractors' personnel and equipment, quality control, staging sequence, which that was a big one, because I know we put the floors up and down several times because people kept driving across the floors, right? Which created some issues. Or
Actually,
refinishing
we
the
said
floors.
staff didn't inspect, but Chris Cotton was there
Right.
a lot. He could
Right.
speak to the
But
details of that.
ultimately, Chris was not the
No,
not
he
the
was not
manager.
tasked with that, no.
He was not. No, this
Right.
is FRU. This is
Yep.
on FRU.
Yep.
And they are also responsible for overseeing third-party testing and inspections. And I just view this as. If I were FRU Development Group, I would view this as a catastrophic failure. I mean, it's not like they failed at one aspect, like they weren't properly supervising concrete batch makeup. I mean, this is at multiple levels, and I respect that Crossland would like a more conservative correction to the field house problem, but if we can't even get into all 19 sites that were acknowledged as having problematic soil, it's a non-starter for me. I mean, we need to make sure that we get proper analysis everywhere that they noted that there could be a problem. And in addition, in one of the things that the Walter P. Moore memorandum discusses is, one of their sources was the Salina Fieldhouse Concrete Slab Repair Memorandum, authorized by FRU Development Group and sent to the city of Salina, dated February 23rd, 2017. I'm not sure that I've ever seen a copy of that memorandum, so, I mean, I would like to see a copy of that to see what FRU's initial take on that was. And in addition, their contract also required, and we've been over this in the past because I submitted an open records request last year for it, monthly progress reports, which they didn't do. But there were also biweekly meeting reports that they were required to do, or required to make sure that somebody was taking minutes. And I wonder if those biweekly meeting reports are available. Because at some point, the problems that we see evidenced in the floor make me concerned about what else got missed. And so I guess what I would like to propose is that we do core samples of all 19 soft spot locations. And our job here isn't to make things easy for Crossland Construction. And I feel really bad for Parks and Rec staff and the people that are using the field house. But our job is to make sure that we get what we paid for and to have the best possible, floor structure that we set out, that we incorporated from the get-go with Fruit Development Group, and that we should have. We're not asking for something new or better. We're just asking for what we paid for. So I'd like to see sampling done at all 19 soft spots, no matter what floor we're taking up.
Sure. There's a lot there. I'll
There
try
is a
to cut.
lot there. I mean, it's more of a
understandably
mini
so.
rant, and I apologize. I couldn't take a breath. I was on a roll.
I'll try to touch on what I can. You're right about Fru's role. You're right about the breakdown, and they had a dedicated person here in the community that was doing full-time construction observation. They went through. They went through at least two individuals in that position. So the purpose of the owner's rep was to avoid ending up where we are right here. I've tackled this and I've kind of bifurcated it in that the focus for me at the moment is finding a solution and getting that implemented, and that doesn't preclude us from taking up our frustration with Fru and our remedies with Fru. But I didn't want to be in an adversarial relationship with them as we're going through their reports and sorting through inspections and identifying the soil concerns and possible locations for core sampling when they're the ones that had that information. So we also kind of went at it with the expectation that we want to be as thorough as we can. The three things, I guess. Just from a practical standpoint, we looked at the practicality of trying to do core samples in the hardwood court area and the synthetic floor area, and we just did not see a way that when all was said and done, we weren't going to end up with less of a flooring. I mean, unless it's a complete tear it up and start over of both of those flooring systems, we didn't necessarily see a way to end up with a finished product that would get us where we want to be. So my somewhat remedy intended to address that concern is the extended warranty. Thinking being that if we don't sample under the synthetic floor, we don't sample under the hardwood floor, and it turns out that we're wrong, and that was 5 years, we should or could very well see vertical separation that's going to reflect on the floor, or going to reflect the hardwood floor or the synthetic floor. And then we still, by way of this agreement, our remedy is to go back to Crossland and say, start over and get it right. In terms of accountability, I can't argue with that. In terms of operating the facility and keeping operations going and trying to balance the disruption and the accountability, this is why it took so long to get to this point, but this is kind of what we were able to come up with.
I say pull up the whole floor, and then let's get it done. Let's get it done clean and not have to come back to this in 5 years.
And that, I think, and I may have to rely on Greg a little bit, but in terms of a remedy, we have noticed them up that the flooring is unacceptable by way of the contract, so they are on notice. Our remedies still remain. If we say that we want to pull up all the floors and start over, I don't think Crossland's going to just get started. We may be into a conflict about alternate solutions, and that may go legal on us. But I'm not going to say that we don't have some rights in that regard.
My question was, currently no vertical cracks have been noticed. And to follow up with Commissioner Hodges' question, do we have a time frame of approximately, if there was to be any vertical cracking, is there any studies that say when that would actually happen within, is it a 2-year, 5-year,
Right.
10-year timeframe?
In the conversations that we've had, and I'm looking at Chris Cotton, Parks Director, and Troy Reiner have been instrumental in all this conversation and investigation, so I want to give them the opportunity to chime in here. But as I understand it, it's more a function of expansion, contraction of, if it's bad subsoil and it's going to go vertical, it's more a function of expansion and contraction of that soil, which is potentially a moisture question. And then if it's just a void, it's a function of the size of that void and concrete spanning it and the load on that concrete. So no one has said definitively, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen in 5 years. But the conversation was, it seems likely that if you can make it 5 years, you're probably not going to see it.
Also, there's been no settling in the building or any issues with footings and that type of thing that we're aware of. So that's all.
Correct.
Okay. Does FRU have any liability in this? And if so, are there remedies?
If we go 5 years and then find the
Is that
problem.
your question? If a problem arises after 5 years? or-
No.
The-
Now, from lack, I
Well,
guess,
there-
loss of
Right.
performance.
My understanding is there's a 5-year statute of limitations on FRU's role in this, and we're just getting started in that time period. So we still have possible remedies, if that
We're 2
helps answer
years-
your question.
2 years into that, 5 years.
I think it starts at the at substantial completion, so I'm not even sure we're 2 years in.
Mayor Davis, any questions?
No, the last two questions, were the last remaining thought that I had, since we theoretically had someone on site who should have been looking out for our interest.
And I'll readily admit, this is less than ideal is an understatement in terms of what we thought from a staff's perspective, felt like we did our due diligence in terms of design, budget, value engineering, bringing in an owner's rep, recognizing the complexity of this is such that it's beyond, our ability to administer. Did not expect to end up with these results at the end. Now we find ourselves having to try to address that. If we do round one of core sampling and we see issues there, then we certainly have the ability to start negotiating more testing, and at that point, we could take the sample everywhere in phase 2, but I totally understand the frustration, the desire to test everywhere. The 2 flooring systems that are in place just are not conducive to moving them out of the way, testing, and putting them back.
And I'm sorry about that. I truly am. I wish that they were all in exposed concrete, but unless we have those 19 sites, the soft spots definitively tested, how can we ever have any confidence that, any solution is going to last? Because we don't have that information. And I would, if we had all 19 sites tested and there weren't any issues, then I think I could become more comfortable with a more conservative repair approach. But absent having that information, there's no way, especially when you look at the fact that it's not just one thing. It's not just the mesh at the incorrect height. It's not just that the joints were cut in at the wrong time. It's that the concrete mix was bad, that the soil analysis and fill was not done correctly. And I feel like we've got a duty to do our due diligence and make sure we understand the full extent of the problem before we even engage in any discussion about what possible solutions could be. And it's an inconvenience. It's not the ideal situation, but we're stuck with a bunch of bad choices. So that's just where I'm coming from. I'm not going to be comfortable until we have all 19 sites and we have tested and we have good information to go on.
Any
Chairman, may
Go ahead.
I realize it's getting a little late, but may I have a couple of minutes to consult with the city manager?
Sure. Well, shall we make it a break, or should we just wait for you?
That's up to you all.
Okay. I think we can sit and wait.
Are we
Study your
making the
file.
clock,
You
or?
may have more questions that come to mind. Okay. You start over, please, would you,
Sure.
Mr. Bingston? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Based on my conversation with the city manager, I would appreciate the opportunity to discuss with you certain matters in executive session. And I think in a matter of moments here can address what would be an appropriate motion if I may.
Okay. Everyone agree?
Agreed.
Well, I don't expect you to agree until you hear the motion. But if,
We'll spend time to wait.
we'll try not to make it too long of a Bingston pause here.
do I? Okay. How long do we need on this?
Oh, how about 20 minutes?
Okay, well, and we can't can't freestyle it out here. Nope, we can't do it.
No.
I move the board recess into executive session for, I'm sorry, did you say 20 minutes?
Yes, please.
20 minutes to discuss contractual obligations relating to the field house construction with legal counsel based upon the need for consultation with an attorney for the public body, which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship pursuant to KSA 75-7319B2.
I'm sorry,
I
my
messed it up. Let me
interlineation.
start again. I missed your insertion there. I move the board recess into executive session for 20 minutes to discuss the contractual obligations of the contractor and the owner's representative relating to field house construction with legal counsel based upon the need for consultation with an attorney for the public body, which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship pursuant to KSA 75-7319B2. The open meeting will resume in this room at 7:52 PM.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll be in executive session. All right, we are back in session. Does the staff have any additional information for us, or I guess we'll start with new information, and then commissioners may have additional questions.
I think there's three things worth touching on. I failed to mention that ground penetrating radar is another testing item that's called for in the agreement. That was suggested by Crossland as an alternative to core testing in some of the locations that we're talking about. We really don't know how effective that's going to be until we do it. Given the thickness of the concrete, the flooring material in question, the kind of the metal and structural aspects of what's in the concrete, can't say for sure what we might get in the way of ground penetrating radar, but they wanted to offer that up as an alternative. We took them up on it, and we'd have an opportunity to conduct that testing and then see what we had for results. I'd like to call on Troy Reinert in particular to walk you through some of the soil testing that was done prior to and what we know in the way of those results. And then when he's done, I think it would be helpful if I kind of recap what our options might be following the testing if we proceed as proposed.
Okay. Thank you. Troy?
Good evening, Commission. I believe that you guys have a copy of the site map that was provided with the soft spots. Call Valley was called out according to the engineer reports from them at specific times that the backfill of the soft spots was done.
Troy, is this that?
Let me.
Yeah, I don't,
Oh, right, okay.
because I only see 14 things marked here, and I think there were 19 referenced.
I thought this was showing them.
That's actually just the 7 that would be, they just got started on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Thank
the
you.
map attached to the proposed agreement is the testing, this proposed testing
That's the 7
locations. Right.
proposed testing, not the
Right.
full height.
Okay.
Yeah, you might be right. You might, if you could, just walk them through that verbally a little bit.
This is what was identified as the soft spots located on site.
Troy, I'm sorry. As difficult as it might be, we somehow need to be sure at least that you're mic'd and that anybody in the audience can hear you.
That's
that-
north.
Yeah,
Okay,
there you go.
this is the north, Jim, so you can
Okay,
see
great,
the.
thank you.
So that was the official
see the different
map
locations
that was
if you-
essentially put out showing the locations of the soft spots identified on site. That
Define soft spots for those that are maybe listening.
soft spots would have been areas that did not originally pass a roll test on site that would the engineer would require to be excavated out and engineered fill brought in. That the engineer also sets up the limitations of the different properties they're looking for in an engineered fill. And then when that engineered fill is brought in, the engineering company is supposed to be called back out and observe the fill done in lifts. Compaction and moisture tests will be done at that time throughout the different lifts to verify that, one, the fill meets the engineer requirements and it is properly installed in those areas. So in relation to that site map, Call Valley, I have got copies of Call Valley's test results that identifies the different soft spots by whole number that correlates with that map, showing that they tested and observed the backfill of those soft spots.
And those 19 soft spots passed their test, correct?
Yes.
Could we, just a favor to staff, could we make sure that both the Kaw Valley reports and the map that shows where all the soft spots are is included in the materials from tonight's meeting?
Sure.
I'm sorry, Troy, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh,
Please
that's
continue.
fine.
And that kind of begs the question of if it passed Caw Valley's inspection the first time, why are we talking about it now? But in terms of due diligence, in terms of what we saw come up, particularly with the water fountain location and the coring that was done there, caused us to have questions about subsurface. So, and one of the theories I think I mentioned, but to elaborate a little bit more, is potentially those could have been addressed. Caw Valley could have inspected them and passed, and then ultimately the plumber or someone, the contractor installing the piping, could have come back through a filled area that had previously passed testing, trenched it for a water line, and then not compacted that back. And I would tell you, whether it's under streets or other things, that's not at all uncommon. But given how much cracking we're seeing, we certainly didn't want to just conclude that was the cause across the board. So I don't want to cut Troy short, but in the event that we do this additional testing as this agreement proposed, and we find something, we still have the ability to say we want more testing, and at that point we could start doing more invasive sampling and some of the other flooring systems going back to these areas. We felt like those 7 locations might give us an indication of whether the backfilling process, inspection process was being done correctly or not. If we see anything to indicate that it wasn't, I think we're back here having an even more difficult conversation, and the expectation in terms of additional testing ratchets up. But I've jumped ahead of you a little bit. Troy, did you have any other detail you wanted to share?
No, I think the ground penetrating radar is being brought in primarily to give us insight to see if we have any additional void below the concrete. With Jim Manley specifically spoke to the ground penetrating company, and they talked with great confidence that the ground penetrating radar technology now has them the ability to view things like the rebar wire and any voids, things like that, down to about 1/8 of an inch. So they think with especially the exposed concrete areas, they'll be able to see with a very high degree of sensitivity on that, which will sort of give us an idea of if we have any additional spots with voids under the concrete.
I thought somewhere in here, I don't know whether it's in your memorandum or if it was in the Walter P. Moore report. I thought that ground penetrating radar, by virtue of the depth of the concrete pour and the wire mesh within the concrete slab, that maybe ground penetrating radar might give us some data, might not. But it
Yeah,
was,
that's
I
my
mean-
understanding as well. I mean, you've got the contractor that provides the ground penetrating radar that's optimistic about it. There has been concern expressed, and we ultimately won't know till they get out here and actually conduct the testing on site, what level of detail that we might be able to get.
Thank you, Troy. Are there other points that staff want to make?
I'd be happy to answer any questions. I guess I would characterize it as the next step that as I mentioned before, this agreement does 3 things. It agrees to a testing plan, and that testing plan may have to be expanded, but it also agrees up front that if we can reach a conclusion that we want to pursue option 1, Crossland's agreed to that, and if we reach a conclusion that there's reason that option 1 is not an acceptable solution, we have Crossland on record saying that they recognize option 2 is extensive removal and replacement of concrete. So we at least get them on record, and then we can do the testing and see what we get in the way of results. If we didn't marry those 2 together, we potentially are doing some testing and we don't know whether we have a meeting of the minds on a solution. I'm pleased that we at least have some form of agreement about a solution now versus we'll test and continue to disagree.
If we do the testing on the 7 core samples that we're talking about in the areas that are not currently covered by either the synthetic floor or the wood floor, and we're satisfied with that, and we go about putting a new whatever type of flooring on that, the 5-year warranty then is for all the floor, the entire facility.
Right. Out of recognition that,
Wanna
it's
make
not
sure.
a full build-out according to the plans. That it's kind of a compromise solution.
Other comments or
And
questions?
that's actually a longer warranty than we'd have on a brand-new concrete floor.
Anyone from the public like to address this?
Good evening, board members. John Blanchard, 250 South 9th, I think. Around 18 months ago, I came here and with concerns about the cracks in the concrete floor, and quite frankly, I was ignored, mocked, heard about how the cracks were, oh, this is cosmetic, and everything was done perfectly. I think part of the problem here is that, you go back into your private room and discuss in secret how you get out of giving the public information that they really need to know. You do your business through city manager updates and private emails and private meetings with the city manager. I think the biggest mistake of this project was firing McCown Gordon, okay? So when I hear language that says, well, we did due diligence, you felt like you did your due diligence. I think you did due diligence, whether or not it was fully good due diligence. When you kowtow to pressure put on by the private group to fire McCown Gordon and go to a different model before we had even got to the guaranteed maximum price, that's where this project went off the rails. Commissioner Ryan, you, Commissioner Randall Hardy, and Kay Crawford decided to fire McCown Gordon. We didn't have a problem with food development on the Tony's Pizza Event Center. That project turned out fantastic. That's because we used a construction manager at risk, okay? Phase 2 of the fire department turned out great. Fire station number 1, we used construction manager at risk. Fire station number 1, phase 1 was a disaster. It's why we went to the CAMR. I think one of the things that you need to learn from this experience is that you need to make sure that you have your procurement process in line. Construction manager at risk, it was good enough for the school districts. It was good enough for us at Tony's Pizza Event Center. But you know what? You gave in to pressure from your friends and your private development groups. The emails are out there, okay? In fact, 3 of you got emails. I never did. But you were all in cahoots together to do this, and I think this project has been slow walked. I think the old city manager wasn't willing to look at it because he was trying to get another job in another community. I don't know why these suggestions or opinions from the you did the walkthroughs and everything with the engineer. That was a year ago. That report was written in June of 2018. I asked, when I was on this commission, what's the deal with the concrete floor? I find out today that we had a memorandum from Food Development back in February of 2017 that addressed the concrete floors. I sat here and asked in meetings, what's the deal with the concrete floor? Your answer and the answer of your predecessor were always, well, it's concrete, it's cosmetic, all concrete cracks. Yeah, it's no. And it seems like now the solution is let's just cover it all up. And we get a 5-year warranty on carpet that's covering up cracks. Once we cover that all up, we're never going to know what's underneath it. Commissioner Hodges, thank you. Thank you for taking this seriously. Thank you for looking out for the taxpayers. Thank you for making the suggestion that you know what, we didn't build this right, and now that's why we're here dealing with this. Let's fix it right. So it's time to quit monkeying around with half measures and, let's try to just figure out what makes us not look so bad. I hope it's not a problem, but you know what? That building was built on a lot of hopes that it would be okay. there were a lot of mistakes done with it, and I'm with you, Commissioner Hodges. I'm worried about the problems we're not aware of yet. So thank you. You keep up the good work. The rest of you, I think you need to do some soul searching and figure out whether or not you're looking out for the taxpayer or whether or not you're looking out to just make yourselves look good. Thank you.
Anyone else like to address the membership? We'll bring it back up here. Is there further discussion, or is there an action for this resolution?
One of the things, and I know that this has been brought up and why it took so long, again, the fact that it's taken another year and we have not seen any vertical cracks is probably a positive. So, again, I appreciate the update on the backfill on the soft spots. I was not aware of that. So I was glad to get that information. I think that helps make my decision.
I do want just one piece of clarification. Are the existing cracks limited only to previously noted soft spot areas, or are they more extensive? Anybody?
I think Chris or Troy can speak to that better than I.
Good evening. Obviously, if there's any cracking underneath existing gym floors, we can't see those.
Right.
The majority of the cracking in the lobby areas where there were soft spots is limited to those areas. There's one area, the other thing that didn't get mentioned, that's in the Walter P. Moore report, is the area where we see the most cracking is also the area where they drove most of the heavy machinery when they were putting up the walls in the facility. And the main lobby area is the main traffic way where most of that equipment went. So we haven't seen what I would call new cracking. We've just simply seen the existing cracks. Some of those have gotten a little bit longer, but they're not new per se, if that makes sense. They're not a whole new batch or a whole new run of cracks.
Just bigger.
Just longer. Not wider, longer. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about soft spots in the soil, and, whether or not further testing is going to be necessary on all 19 previously identified and previously tested soft spots. And I just wanted to know, is there a 100% correlation? I mean, we've identified so many things that went wrong here. I mean, whether it's the concrete batch mix, whether it's the wires, whether it's how the expansion joints were cut or the sections were hooked up together. So what I'm looking at is if we're not going to test, all 19 soft spots, I mean, is that, because to me then it's like we're making a case that the cracking is only occurring in the soft spots and it's only due to that, but actually it's due to a lot of different, there's a lot of variables out there. And so from where I'm sitting, it's incumbent upon us to do our research and to do our due diligence. And a phrase that keeps coming up is the best solution based upon what's known. And we can't know what we don't know. And if we don't do our due diligence for all the batch reports, if we don't do our due diligence for all of the soil plans, then I just don't feel like we've got any kind of any confidence in our product, in our finished product, that we aren't going to be dealing with the ripples of this from years down the line. So I'm fine with approving this resolution for the addendum with the construction contract, but with the caveat that all identified 19 soft spots need to be sampled, and that we also need to do some further research in terms of taking a look at, making sure that the depth of the wire, making sure that the batch reports, and just looking at every single issue that the Moore report addressed. So, I mean, I'm just speaking in general, not to you specifically,
Okay.
Chris. I wasn't expecting a response, so at
Okay,
any rate,
So you're done with me?
I'm done with you.
Okay, thank you.
We may not have covered it sufficiently, but part of the conversation that went on from the time of the Walter P. Moore report to the present is trying to figure out the interrelationship of the mesh and the timing of the control joints being cut. So a lot of that conversation was the mesh not being cut, the control joints not being cut correctly is what is suspected to be the cause of a lot of that cracking that Chris is referring to. Instead of having it cut in a way that it could expand and contract, it's having to find its own relief points. So the reason for the focus on the core sampling is to see if there's any other causes beyond that, because everyone involved in the conversation, including our third-party structural engineer, is of the mind that if it's the location of the mesh, if it's the control joints and the timing of the control joints, that is contributing to horizontal cracking, but it will mitigate vertical separation. The one remaining concern that could contribute to vertical separation is the soil subgrade. That's why we're down to focusing on core sampling the subgrade locations. Now, if we want to go into that in greater detail, we probably do need to bring in Frew and a representative of Walter P. Moore and Jim Manley, and we can take that from the top. But everything that we've been doing leading up to this point was trying to take what information we had available, get the subject matter experts' advice on what they believe is the cause of what we're seeing. And I'm repeating myself, but we believe the lack of cutting the control joints and the mesh placement contributes to a lot of that horizontal cracking. And the only way we know to identify the vertical question is with additional core samples.
I guess I just, I guess I got something a little bit different out of the Moore report, I guess, than what you did. And admittedly, I haven't been in on all the conversations that you have been. But when they talk about deviations and defects and several different possible causes of those, it doesn't say, I don't know.
Yeah, admittedly,
I just get something different.
I nor our outside engineers are going to be able to give you a definitive answer. We've got we've got a situation in the field that we're trying to address as it sits.
Because it is likely that additional movement and distress will occur in the future. And, even if it were 100% cosmetic, we paid for a floor with minimal cracking. We didn't get what we paid for. So, if we're going to focus on the investigation of the soil, I'm as inconvenient and as expensive as it is, I would prefer that we rule out all the 19 soft spots that were previously mapped.
Yeah, and just, so I'm clear, to do that would require lifting the
Correct.
the
Floors, wooden and synthetic.
By the time you lift the floors, you might as well replace them.
Yeah, I think that's especially the case with the synthetic floor. The wood floor, I'm not sure that it would be full removal and replacement. The synthetic floor, we know from our past experience with the damage to the floor and the need to replace it, rather than do isolated replacements, they did a full replacement to get us to where we are today.
If we approve the resolution of the contract now, that deals with the 7 core samples and then dealing with Crossland as far as how to deal with the current concrete cracks in the entryway and around the office, and also extending the contract or the warranty for 5 years, correct?
Correct. And if we find any, if we have any reason
Any reason
for
to move
concern
on,
based on
then
those
it
core
leaves it-
samples, we can
right.
expand the testing. As I went through the packet and the agenda item, I realized that we did not get the resolution in your packet. It's very short and sweet, but printed it and, oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I overlooked it.
It was
I
in the one we
apologize.
just got.
Okay.
That was
All
handed
right.
back out, yeah.
Staff's a step ahead of me. Thank you.
Are we at a point that the chairman can take a motion on the side?
With that, Commissioner Ryan, I move a resolution approving an addendum to construction contract between the Salina Fieldhouse Qualified Active Low-Income Community Business, Inc., a Kansas not-for-profit corporation, and Crossland Construction Company, Inc., a Kansas corporation, relating to the Salina Fieldhouse construction project.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Item 4 is unfinished business or other business. We have any?
I don't.
Is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Troy, would you like this done?